Welcome back to another episode of the Changelog. As always, I'm joined by Daniel.
Hello, everybody. How's it going? Here with Victor. Happy to be here, coming from a secret location in Tampa Bay, Florida. Bouncing around, as Victor knows.
Yeah, let's start with that. There has been good reasons for why we haven't actually done an episode in a while. And
yes.
Yeah.
One of those good reasons are a reliable internet connection, which always helps with modern 21st century workflows. So we're happy to announce that is reestablished.
Yes.
And very happy about that. Yes. So
yeah, you were hit by the whole disaster that hit Florida.
Yes.
You were actually at our company summit whilst it happened.
That's true. Yes. So we were in Portugal, and as Screenly's resident Florida man, it's just up to Florida man things, and we got totally smacked by two 100-year storms in 10 days. So that was very exciting, and we'll just leave it at that. So
yeah, and the place you usually record from is no more.
Yeah, that got
for the time being.
There's some studs and not a reliable internet or electricity. So have obviously changed locations, and happy to be here. But yeah, that's part of the Florida lifestyle. You enjoy the beautiful weather and the beautiful beach until it's not, and back in action. So
indeed, yes. But let's start with the summit, because I think that's we were at the summit. We had our nth. I don't even know how many summits we've done, to be fair, by now, but we had our annual summit in Portugal this year.
We did, which was very nice. It was we actually had also done a summit in Lisbon way back in 2019, so it was crazy to think that it had been so long since the Portugal reunion, but we did it again. Was super nice. Got everyone together under a few roofs now that we're growing. It used to be one roof, but can't say that anymore.
No.
And I think the sun never sets on Screenly, so we had people come from all around the world.
Yes, a few newcomers that never been to the events before. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, so and saw some old faces as well from previous jaunts with Screenly. I know one of our past designers lives in Portugal, and got to catch up with him and hear about his recent projects, and it was super fun. So I got to do some tourism things too. So the Pena Palace in outside of Lisbon was super great. Had some good Portuguese food, and
that we did. Yeah, no, it's a successful summit. Good to see everybody in person. All right, so we did our summit, and then
so we did our summit. Have been up to a bunch of stuff in the last month. So we did our summit. Screenly also did the Ubuntu Summit the Hague. So tell us about your trip to the Hague, Victor.
Yeah, so we were invited by Canonical to be at Ubuntu Summit, which we've been every year, to be fair. We've been present there every year. But the difference this year is they reached out to us ahead of time asking if we wanted to run all the signage for the event. So the idea was basically every booth, so they have booth there from some of the top software vendors around the world, along with the many open source project, but every booth at the summit had a sign or a screen. And the Canonical event team reached out to us early and asked if we wanted to help them run that for them. And they had an interesting proposition, which was, let's make sure that the process of doing all these screens is done ahead of time. So basically, for everybody who attended or had a booth, rather, they submitted content to a shared Google Drive folder where by the time they arrived at the venue, it was already showing on the screens. So they didn't have to do any setup. So they basically come there and everything is already running. So that by itself was a great user experience. We got some really good feedback on that, and people are very happy in general, because if you are running events, either as an event organizer or if you're exhibiting at events, you know that the last thing you want to deal with is wiring and dealing with setting up media players as you are trying to scramble to get everything ready before general opening happens. So it was a new thing, and we've actually taken this and packaged this solution up as something we call Screenly for Events, where you can rent players and we drop ship them to you, and we can help with our support team can manage all the content for you, so you don't have to worry about that. You rent the players, we can pre-configure them depending on what your needs are, and then by the time your guests are arriving, everything's up and running. So this is something we packaged up as a product. So if you are running an event or if you are exhibiting at events, we're happy to help, and that's something that's live today. And get in touch with our normal support channels if you want interested in that.
Tell us a little bit more about the ideal customer type for Screenly for Events. So, I mean, maybe start with what was the setup at Ubuntu Summit? What are people looking for in terms of like number of vendors that we'd cater to? Timeline for getting everything organized. What can people expect?
So I think this is a good solution for mid to small size events. So at Ubuntu Summit, we had, I believe, 30 some screens. So not small, but not like world scale event either, right? So I think it's good for like internal conferences or smaller community conferences where you have in that range of, I would say, 30 to 50 screens. I think it's great. And one of the things we were able to do, by the way, was to repurpose all these screens when you wanted to redirect traffic. So when there were conference talks happening and they wanted to redirect people away from the event area, or sorry, the exhibition area, we could use the screens to drive that traffic over. And I think that was one of the big selling points for the organizers at the event. So that was actually a really positive thing. So I think the ideal event is in that ballpark, 30 to 50 screens, a mid-sized conference, worldwide, I would say, but Western Europe and North America, ideally, that's kind of where we're operating. And lead time is a bit TBD, depends on the variables. So get in touch if if you're interested in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes those big events, like everyone schedules, more things than can be sorted out by people's, sensory inputs, and then they have like a talk or something, and 3 people show up because everyone's in the conference hall and feeling disappointed. So is that with our priority override?
Yes, that's right. That's how we. Exactly using the priority override on the playlist. We were to like override that at certain hours. So nice. It was very easy to organize everything. We had a global playlist with that just took over the screen and say, "Hey, the keynote is happening right now. Go to the main stage, essentially, or go to the main auditorium." So very, very cool, actually. And the event itself was really good. We had one talk during the actual conference. So we gave a talk, or some of our colleagues gave a talk about Anthias, which is our open source digital signage solution. And then I gave a talk at Ubuntu's internal engineering summit, which happened just after it. It was a good event. Met good amount of new people, but also a lot of familiar faces. But it's always a pleasure to attend these events. Good community events, good people. So always a pleasure to go back to Ubuntu Summits.
And maybe for people who are not familiar with the history and overlap, but what's the connection with Screenly and Ubuntu? What should people know about?
Yeah, we've been working very close with Ubuntu / Canonical as they go by these days, teams for quite some time. And we were the first adopter of Ubuntu Core, which is Ubuntu's IoT operating system, which is very hardened and kind of ideal for the use case that we are doing, which is secure digital signage. So we've been working with them very closely over the years. We got great relationship with their engineering team and the teams all around for working with them. So we go way back we go way back, and that's the relationship really. Like we work really closely with them, and we're helping them. And as you will be speaking about later, we were doing an event with them in December as well, coming up. So
that's right. Yeah, we Screenly will be. I will be at DSE in December. December 8th through 10th. Canonical has a booth there, and Screenly will be also featured there. So if you're in Vegas and want to not get into trouble, come say hi, and we'll love to have a chat.
Absolutely.
See you guys
there. Yeah, I won't be attending, but Daniel, you will be representing us, and we will be powering the screens there as well.
That's right. Yep. So super looking forward to that, and of course seeing our friends at Canonical. And so I think that work with Ubuntu and Canonical is a good segue also into the efforts we've recently made with security and digital signage. So we're definitely not shy about that being a priority for our company.
That's right.
Which for many other companies in the industry, security is really an afterthought. And of course, that leads to a whole host of problems that tend to come up at the worst times. Whether that's just embarrassing content being displayed on a sign by a hacker just to show that, they were successful in having some fun at the expense of your company, or, serious data breaches where digital signage is used as. So one of those efforts we've been aligning ourselves to is the Secure by Design effort. That's actually launched by the U.S. government and is being taken up with quite a bit of seriousness around the world. So, Victor, maybe say a couple lines. What is Secure by Design? Why is it important to the signage industry? And how is Screenly taking part in that?
Yeah, so Secure by Design is a kind of voluntary program from CISA, which is the government agency that kind of advises all the other government agencies on security. And it's basically a voluntary pledge that you sign as a supplier of saying, we care about security, but beyond just marketing buzzwords, but actually, not only do we care about security, but here's the evidence backing that up. And a lot of it goes down to what's called supply chain transparency and supply chain security, meaning that prove to me as an outsider that you actually are secure, essentially. And there are obviously a lot of security compliance frameworks out there. There is SOC 2, there is NIST cybersecurity framework, there is ISO, but some of them, they definitely improve your security posture. No, not gonna pretend that they aren't, but they don't go far enough, I would argue. And CISA's Secure by Design takes this to a step further. And one of the things they're doing is to mandate what they call radical transparency, radical software transparency, which is basically like you need to prove what goes into your software. And the way to do that is something called SBOMs, which is software bill of material, which we mentioned before on the show. But it's basically, the best analogy is basically if you go into a grocery store and you pick up a chocolate bar, on the back of that you can see the ingredients of what makes it into that chocolate bar. That is a good analogy to what an SBOM is to software. So it basically states everything goes into your software, which usually means what kind of open source libraries are you depending on to build your software, and what version of those, and what license are they issued under. And this is very important because you can take this SBOM and you can feed it into a security audit tool and say, hey, you are vulnerable to these issues. Now, SBOM is a very hot topic, and a lot of people talk about it, but very few people are actually doing it properly. And as we've learned in our journey, and we've teamed up with a company called SBOMify, and is that doing that at scale is actually quite challenging. And that's what we've been working with together. We published a case study with SBOMify on how we've done this, essentially, because actually doing that across our entire product suite is actually quite challenging. So we are going to publish more information about how we've done this over time. But long story short is that we are taking this stuff serious. We are now building SBOMs for not every part of our product, but I would say we are probably 80% there. And we are working with Canonical, for instance, on getting some of the missing pieces there, together with them, closed out. But it's an ongoing effort, and it's basically just goes to show that we are taking security seriously, and we're actually putting our money where our mouth is and actually doing this properly. And the secure by design framework fits very well into that, and it really allows us to publicly commit to doing security right. I think that is the best way to think of it.
Yeah, and with these SBOMs, talk a little bit about what are most software companies' interaction with that. I mean, when in the ideal world, when should a company fully have their SBOMs sorted out? When do they actually do it? And what are some of the problems that come from that difference?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm involved with some of the CISA working groups as well, helping with some of the reference implementations there. And in a perfect world, you do it from day zero. But the reality is that few projects start today, right? If you're starting from zero today, yeah, you should do it from day zero. But then it's about retrofitting into your system. But you should do it. You should essentially build an SBOM for each release that you're making. Each software release, and that differs between when you're and how you're releasing. So if you're doing like we are doing with our hardware, for instance, we are doing firmware updates, and they are semantic versioning, as they call it. So we release them every 2-3 weeks. We release a new version of that. That's what we bake in SBOM. That's what we try to bake in SBOM for that. Whereas if you talk about backend component side, that is probably rolling releases. So we can deploy multiple times a day, and every time you deploy, you should ship an SBOM. So it really comes down to that. But the maturity of the SBOM world is rapidly changing, and in part because of all the legal framework that's being pushed through right now. CRA, EU Cyber Resilience Act, since our last recording, that has actually been finalized now. So now it's actually coming together. It will actually force a lot of companies, and will make a lot of companies very uncomfortable about this. I gave a talk last week at a signage event, and most people don't even know this in the signage industry, but they will be impacted by it. And that's the thing, that we've been beating on this drum for a long time, but now through legislation, it's being poked at and actually being forced into play. It's a market failure to a great degree, security at large, and now it's happening. So I'm bullish on these things that's coming through, and CRA in Europe is probably going to be a big driving force for adoption of SBOMs in general.
Yeah. And how can companies think of it beyond just like, oh man, here's another security requirement? Like this is just going to be a cost and a speed bump in development. I mean, what are the positives for the company in terms of getting easier access to larger, government or enterprise deals? How can they think of it in a positive light?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So there's something called the SBOM maturity life cycle, where the first phase is essentially tick box exercise. Like, I have an SBOM, but I don't really care about the quality of it. And that's kind of the very I am adherent to the compliance at the very basic level. At that point, yeah, it might unlock some deals, but it's not adding any value to your operations. And then on the polar opposite side of the scale, people are using them, and as we are intended to do, for driving operations, to understand better what is your security posture. And I know I've had conversation with CISOs and security folks at banks, for instance, and they use SBOMs as part of the deployment pipeline, where they basically say, hey, is this secure? If there are any known vulnerabilities in this piece of software, if so, need to be flagged up, and there are alerts being fired. So I think the way to think of it is use it to improve your posture rather than as an exercise in just compliance. But the compliance part will probably drive the adoption, and then once people see that, they will understand there are advantages to it as well. So I think that's the best way to think of it.
Mm-hmm. And I assume too, once companies get, do their first rollout, it becomes a lot easier because they're not doing this essentially archaeology.
That's right.
Code base years back when nobody remembers.
That's right, and it gives to. I mean, one of the things that I think is really powerful is it exposes all your dirty laundry, right? All these things that you have forgotten about that you actually have in your code base, and that's the reality of any big software project. That when you've been around for a long time, you you have components in there that you haven't thought about, and those might be your security problems. So that's actually a big part of it. It's just understanding, like doing an inventory check, what actually goes into my software, much like the recipe list.
Yeah. Well, talking about software and development, Screenly has, of course, been hard at work and always looking to improve our product for our customers and make digital signage easily accessible. Couple things we've been up to that we should definitely touch on in this episode. One, we totally overhauled our PagerDuty integration. So, Victor, you've been a lot of the push behind that. So, what should everybody need to know about Screenly's PagerDuty integration?
Yeah, so for those not familiar with PagerDuty, it's a very popular tool for alert management for server outages and server related or operations related issues. We have for a while integrate with PagerDuty, so if a screen goes down, we can send notification to PagerDuty, which can then route it to, well, as the name implies, the person on PagerDuty. So we've had that integration for a while. This integration takes it to a next level as far as security goes. So we've actually overhauled the way we communicate with PagerDuty and use kind of more modern, more standardized frameworks for doing so. Something called OAuth, which kind of like is a unified way of integrating to applications or to platforms. So the new integration uses OAuth, and that improves the security, which is always something that we are looking at for, and improves the user experience as well, because now it's more like a click and connect workflow rather than copy this API token, paste it in here. So it's more streamlined for the end user as well, in addition to be more secure.
I think PagerDuty actually came to us through customer requests too, which is I think it's interesting to point out, because digital signage, sometimes when people first think about it, like, okay, it's a nice to have. It can help enhance the retail experience or a restaurant's experience, but in many cases, with some of our customer deployments, like, it is really mission critical.
Yes.
I mean, we have customers who are running the departure and arrival times of ferry boats, right? That have to operate on a very quick schedule and need to coordinate, hundreds of people.
Or like super high profile, like lobby screens, right? Like you don't want to have like a blue screen of death, like as you're greeting your customers or visitors on a big screen, right, in the lobby.
Yeah, that, or even lobbies at hotel venues like that, or at large events like we had at Ubuntu Summit. So I just want to highlight that Screenly is tooled from outward touch points like the PagerDuty integration, but also throughout for these mission critical workflows.
And I think there's one important point to note there, which is the way we see it is that signage tend to, well, in many ways, I think signage should be owned by the IT operations or the AV team, right? People that understand how to orchestrate it at scale. And those are usually the customer that we speak to, right? People that are in the engineering organization. And many screens are like dashboards, right, for mission critical data in Office as well, by the way, in terms of mission criticalness, I guess. So, but this request is really like catered to when signage is owned by the IT organizations, how do we slot into their workflows? And PagerDuty is usually something that is oftentimes deployed already in an IT organization. So that's kind of why slotting Screenly into that workflow just makes natural sense.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that Screenly does well as well, which is we have we can have IT and teams audiovisual staff own it and give them the tools that they feel comfortable with to own digital signage from like an infrastructure standpoint.
Yeah.
But then also that doesn't though mean that they're just like locked in as the only operators of this.
No.
And once it's set up from an infrastructure standpoint, they can easily hand over the reins to a team's marketing or PR department who's actually doing the day-to-day content strategy for digital signage. So it's really two prongs, and I think we do a good job of enabling both teams.
Absolutely. And I think that's an important note, right? There's, in any larger scale signage deployment, you will have cross departmental overlaps, right? And I think that just the way it has to be, because at the end of the day, a signage player is a piece of hardware that is more similar to anything that sits on the network that managed by the IT team, rather than just another third-party SaaS product that marketing is using. Like it sits on the network. It needs to be owned, needs to be communicated with end of life and security updates and all those things. Right?
Yeah, but much like, IT will set up the phone lines, right? Like they're not making the phone calls, so
that's right. Exactly.
Same thing for signage. They'll set up the signs, but actually doing the content strategy and that stuff, they can hand that off easily. So
that's right.
Yeah. So also talking about customer requests, one thing that has always been on Screenly radar is PDF support. So businesses have content on PDF and they want to throw it onto a sign, and that has a lot of complexities. We supported it maybe I think even like 4 years ago or more, and we ended up taking that support offline because it was just super screwy. We really want to work by the philosophy of, hey, if we're not going to do it all the way, we're not going to do it. But we've come back to that just because of its popularity. So Victor, what is PDF support for digital signs, and what can customers expect at Screenly?
Yeah, so just to kind of recap what you were saying, we used to have PDF support, but it was very hackish PDF support. Like it very bare bones, kind of broke very frequently, didn't handle very many edge cases. People were using it, but we felt they never met the Screenly bar of quality. So we pulled the plug on that, I want to say 2 years ago or so, but ever since we had a lot of customer requests saying, hey, we really want to show PDFs on our screens. And fair enough, like there is a good use case for it. Even though it's not like a medium that is designed for signs, I can see the use case for it. And we had a sit down with our engineering team, and we were basically like, okay, if we're going to do PDF support, how are we going to do it? And let's do it properly. So what that meant was two things. We have now fully overhauled the way it looks when you upload a PDF, because a PDF is very different than an image, because it's not a single page to start with. A PDF can have hundreds of pages, right? So, and this is kind of going back to the problem and the shortcomings with the previous solution. Like if you uploaded a PDF with like 100 pages, it kind of semi-broke. We wanted to make sure that actually worked properly now. So today, if you upload a PDF into the user interface, we upload a file and we actually store the native PDF, unlike before where we converted to images. So we actually store the real PDF. And then when you're actually consuming that PDF, you probably only want to view a few pages of that. You probably don't want to, like, if you have a 20-page PDF, you probably don't want to show 20 pages of that PDF. You probably want to say like, oh, actually, the diagrams on page 5 are the one that I actually care about. So when you upload the PDF and you go into that PDF now, you can select which pages are relevant to you. So you add those pages, and those pages turn into assets. Now, you can have 10 pages from that 100-page document. And what happens then behind the scenes, and this is kind of why we kind of went back to the drawing board to engineer this properly, is that on the back end, we pull down that PDF to the actual player. So if you have 10 pages from the same PDF, we're not pulling down 10 pages. We're pulling down the proper PDF. And also, an import variable here is PDF is a vector-based format. Well, it's a vector-based format that could include rasterized images, but at the end of the day, it's something that could scale between any given resolution. So on the actual player, we display this native PDF. So if you have 10 pages in the PDF, you only have downloaded PDF once, and then we can display as metadata any given of those pages. And we had to think about things like rotations and things about how do we display these various elements. So that's part of the whole user experience. And now you upload PDF, you say, hey, I want page 1, 2, and 3, and then you schedule as content. And we have a recording of this that I can link to in the show notes of how this actually works. But needless to say, it's a native experience. PDFs are now a native asset type in Screenly, and that's simply important. And we didn't really feel like the previous solution was there, but now it's a good experience. So there we go. PDF support is live today, and it works on our Pi 4 and our and our x86 based players on firmware version 2.8.2 or later, I believe it is. That should be visible.
Yeah, and for digital signage users who typically use our PDF support, what's a typical use case? Are these is this PDFs with business reports and data like that? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's having kind of reports and diagrams and charts and stuff like that. That's a very common use case. But it also depends on your organization, right? Some organizations, that's how they receive their content, and they just don't have the design resource in house, I guess, to like restyle that or reshape that to a screen native platform. And I guess that's a format that some customers are more familiar with working with than others. And particularly if they're receiving them already, then yeah, they might want to use them natively. So that's kind of why we decided to use it. But yeah, it's usually, I don't think anybody produces content for signage in PDF format. It's more like, let's repurpose what we already have and let's use that for our screens.
And then just throw it on with it. Very cool.
That's right.
That was one of our recent projects, PDF support. I think also that highlights an interesting, I guess, company philosophy as well, which is, hey, if we're going to do something, we're really going to do it. We get inbound from customers saying, oh, do you do this or that? This company does this or that. And, being in the industry, we know that, okay, yes, it says it on that website, but what does that actually mean? And oftentimes we find that if it says something on the website, like the customer will imagine that as what they like the, ideal of whatever that support is, when really it's just one or two things, which is kind of nonsense. So, what is this company philosophy of, if we're going to do something, we're only going to do it all the way? How have you found that has, played out? What are the trade-offs?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that if you look in the marketplace, there are definitely companies out there that will just go down the tick box exercise. Like, yes, we have this feature. Yes, we have this feature. But then it's a very mediocre feature. And our philosophy has always been, if you're going to do something, you're going to do it well. And that means that we are not going to have all the features that some other competitors have. And that's fine. But what we are going to do is that the features that we do have, they work. And they are maybe not at feature parity with some of the competitors. And again, that's fine. We don't want to do everything, and we're not trying to cater to every possible solution. But what we do have works. And if you look at the signage use cases, that most use cases are actually not that complicated. They need to display content, and they need to do it at scale, and they need to do it reliably. And that's kind of what we really focus on. Like, how can we do things well at scale? Those and securely. Those are kind of the core principles behind it. And if we can't do it securely, if we can't do it well, we're not going to do it. And that's a good example of that is actually one of the requests. We've had a lot of requests coming in over the years is Word support and like support for PowerPoint. Well, the reality is that you can't really do it well. Like, you could we add that feature tomorrow? Yeah, absolutely we could. Could we do that feature well? No. And what you'll find out, and just like you said, is that all these companies says, oh, I can do X, Y, and Z. Yeah, technically speaking, they can. Will it provide a good user experience? No. Because it's actually not.
Yeah.
But Word and PowerPoint is a good example of that, because you can actually not do it in a Linux environment like almost all signage companies are running natively well, because it's a proprietary format.
Yeah, well, and I think too, some of the players in the market that do that type of checklist presentation, one thing that comes along with that also is that their environments are super closed down. And one thing Screenly's done that I think is quite interesting to combat that, and also to allow users to develop what they want to the level that they want, is through our Edge apps. And so, Viktor, maybe you can talk a little bit about Edge apps and how they allow people to develop these custom solutions, and not just the first pass way that the company decides they're going to be enabled, but exactly the way that they want it.
Yeah. So the Edge app has been like a long-term vision. I think we are maybe like 30% towards the end goal when it comes to Edge app, because we built a lot of things, but there's a lot left to be built and a lot of things we want to build. But one thing that we are built with edge apps is basically allow you to create a good user experience on the device, and that it comes down to like serving content locally. And we speak at some big vendors right now that are looking to build edge apps internally or externally, and with our playground on GitHub, we have a lot of those examples. And I think one thing that's really sets apart edge apps is what we're actually showcasing with the new edge apps that we're publishing right now. So I think we have 2 out of our 10 some edge apps that we have in the sample database, which are also in our app store, modified for, which is something called branding. So this is actually a really cool feature as far as edge apps. And I don't think anybody done this before. And what this means that when a customer signs up, if somebody goes in and sign up with, I don't know, a .nasa.gov email address, for instance, when they first deploy these edge apps, they will be automatically skinned to a NASA look and feel. So it actually looks like a native NASA asset rather than a Screenly asset that it would normally look like. And that's part of the blueprint and the building blocks for edge apps. So if somebody wanted to build an application or an edge app that leverage these same functionalities with custom branding, it's already built in there. So that's one of the big features we launched around edge apps is the branding abilities. It happens automatically when you sign up. And if you want to override the logo, the color scheme, all that stuff, you can do that directly in the user interface. And that branding is important, and it really shows the flexibility of edge apps. And like I said, there are a lot left to be built in the edge app environment, but we have come a long way in terms of building the foundation of that runtime and development environment. And we keep pushing that envelope every week and just building more and more things around that.
And so again, so the branding with Screenly Edge Apps is totally hands off. So that the user just enters their sign up details. We get the website, we pull the data, and we present it.
It's slightly more complicated than that, but yeah, in short, long short of it is basically like by the time they land in our web interface, we already have the branding data. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's
very cool.
We cover.
Very cool. Well, on to the next of the different features and tools we've been developing for Screenly. So we mentioned the PagerDuty support and integration, and we've also integrated with Slack. So
yes,
similarly, giving notifications when things happen on screens. What should people know about our Slack integration? Why is it useful?
Yeah, so we're a big Slack shop ourselves. We use Slack very extensively internally for a lot of things, for a lot of internal communication. As most or many tech companies are. And our integration with PagerDuty is very similar to our integration with Slack. So that means that you can basically connect your Screenly account or your Screenly team with your Slack account, and then you basically select what channel in Slack you want notification to be sent to. And then when a screen goes offline, for instance, that is automatically pushed to Slack, so that you can loop in the relevant stakeholders and say, hey, guys, we need to look at the screen. Can somebody please go there and make sure that it's all right? Maybe it's been unplugged, or maybe the networking is wrong, or something like that, right? But it gives you the from the center, and basically means that Screenly communicates where your team lives. And this kind of goes to our core principle of Screenly, which is we don't want to be everything to everybody, but we want to be a platform that can communicate with the platforms that you are using. And that's Slack integration is a good example of that. The PagerDuty is a good example of that. But it kind of goes back to the whole principle of like do one thing and do one thing well. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We just want to integrate with the tools that people are already using and find ourselves adding value there.
Yeah, and so with the Slack integration, the teams can see what's happening within their account, but then also since it's in their company chat platform, they can talk about whatever's interesting about that particular
you can do like
and all the oddities around it.
Yeah, you can do root cause analysis and all that stuff in Slack, right? And that's your chat platform. And then if there's enough demand, I mean, I can envision that being further, and like you could actually integrate that Slack bot further, and so that you can actually interface with the screen using that platform, a Slack bot as well. But we don't have that yet. But if there's enough demand for that, like it wouldn't be too difficult to say have a Slack integration that could potentially even add content. You could add an image. You could ask it to reboot, give it a status. All that stuff would be potentially possible if there's enough user demand for it.
Yeah, I thought we promised at the start we wouldn't say AI, but we're getting dangerously close, Victor. So we got to watch out. So Slack obviously isn't the only chat platform. Do we have a roadmap for others?
Yeah, we're looking at we've looking to do probably Teams as well, because obviously that's a lot of our customer base is based on Teams. So that's probably the next notification integration we will be doing. I don't have a firm roadmap on that or timeline for that, but it's probably going to be the next one we do for that.
Yeah. I've seen really interesting coverage on how Teams, Microsoft, Suite, and Gemini are really pumping those integrations in terms of just like having a central text chat interface on a computer, and then trying to use it to drive whatever work around a company's software suite. So
yeah, I mean, like Teams also is far more widely used than Slack, in terms of, in particular in the enterprise world. It has a far bigger footprint. The tech world runs on Slack largely, but outside the tech world, in the more traditional business, Teams is kind of where the market is, right? So that's is natural for us to go there as well.
Yeah. Well, interesting. So people can use the Slack integration now, and
yes,
we have it's live, and in the future, soon coming future, we'll have integration with these other chat tools as well. So,
and if you're interested in any particular one, reach out, and we're happy to have a chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Other thing we should talk about is the Screenly Chrome extension.
Yes.
So we've had this cooking up for a while. We've made some recent changes to it. What is Screenly's Chrome extension, Victor? What can it do?
Yeah, so the extension called Add to Screenly, and we wrote it, I think 5 or 6 years ago. And back then, it solved a very specific problem for citing into web pages. So essentially, like if you were trying to authenticate into a dashboard that required you to type in some credentials, it basically, layman terms, it allows you to transfer your session to Screenly, essentially. So you logged in on your desktop, this Chrome extension extracted some data and sent it to Screenly. Now, we kind of forgot about this extension. It wasn't actually something that we took care of and maintained. And then randomly, we looked at the usage data, and actually a lot of people were using it. So we have resurrected it, and it's done, and it's currently under review. So it should be go live, I think, well, probably tomorrow, I would say, or the day after, like this week, it should definitely go live, I would imagine, the new update. And a part of it has been, we've open sourced the entire Chrome extension, so you can see what actually goes into it. We've rewritten it to our latest API, and the API obviously has changed a lot over the last 5 years. So the new Chrome extension uses our v4 API. And it also used a different authentication method, because back then we didn't actually have support for API tokens, for instance. So it used a different way to authenticate to the backend. So now it's using a more standardized way of authenticating to Screenly, and we're adding some more work to that as well. And like I said, it's open source. We actually provide an SBOM for this, so there's an SBOM in the Chrome extension already that you can pull down and inspect and see what actually goes in there. And it should be available very soon in the Chrome App Store, and then if there's more demand for it, we might actually expand that to other browsers as well. But for now, it's the Chrome extension, and it's back to life, and glad to give it some more TLC after sitting there collecting dust for the last 5 or so years.
Well, and users as well. So, So one thing I think that brings up that I definitely noticed is a pattern with customers using digital signage is that the whole authentication issue is really not thought about until it's actually like time to log in, right? So, and then it's like, okay, wow, this is actually a pretty big problem, and how do we deal with it? So, what is the authentication problem with digital signage? what does Screenly do to do away with that problem for users?
Yeah, I mean, this is a complicated topic, and a lot of conversation we have inbound is people are just like, hey, I just want to log in. But the reality is that the answer is it depends, right? It depends on the dashboard. So we have a Power BI integration, for instance, that has very specific ways of logging in that requires a lot of engineering work to streamline. You have other dashboards like Grafana is a very popular open source dashboard that's used a lot. They use a different method. But generally speaking, when it comes to authentication, the most common modern way of authenticating to a dashboard in an automated fashion is use something called bearer tokens, which is technically speaking an HTTP header that you send as you render the page, and that will kind of act as a login session and bring you into the actual page you want to see. Now, a lot of incoming requests we have, people just have some random dashboard and say, hey, I need to log into this. And they just like, well, I need to enter the username and password by hand, essentially, because there is no way of automatically doing it. And this is where the Add to Screenly extension started. Because we're basically saying, hey, yes, you could do that. You log into your dashboard and you say Add to Screenly, and we can kind of transform that into a login session. That unfortunately will expire after, well, depending on when that cookie expires, but it usually expires after X days or weeks, depending on the configuration of that dashboard or platform. So that brought us to our next iteration on solving that problem, which was something we called JavaScript injection. And that allowed us to write a piece of JavaScript that automatically logged into a web page on your behalf, so essentially mimicking what you were doing with your keyboard. Now, the drawback with that method was that it was not easy to produce, and we have a bunch of these in our GitHub, our playground on GitHub. We have a bunch of examples for various platforms to automatically do this. So that was problem A. And problem B was that because of the method of your logging in, essentially your username and password was stored in plain text inside of that JavaScript snippet. And it was something that we liked because it doesn't really adhere to good security standards and good security principles. So whilst it did a job, and it's something that's live today that people can use already, it never really adhered to our standards. So we're actually doing a second thing here, which is actually we're folding that structure into our Edge app environment so we can adhere to stricter security guidelines and repackage these JavaScript applications as Edge app items in our Edge app store, while piggybacking on the security perimeters that we built for the Edge app environment. So meaning that things are far more secure, so that we don't feel like we're breaching your trust by stuffing your credentials into a JavaScript that anybody with that account can actually access and read back. So it's just bringing things forward. But the long of the short is that authentication is complicated, and depending on the dashboard, there is no universal solution. There are a bunch of different solutions, but there's no universal way of logging into a dashboard, short of the more modern way of bearer tokens that is not widely supported across a lot of platforms out there, particularly for like internal dashboards that are built in-house.
All right. So for users right now, what are the authentication options available to them by Screenly? So they have a KPI dashboard that has sensitive data. They don't just want to make a public link that gets thrown around. How do they display it securely on Screenly today?
Yeah. So option one would be, first of all, get in touch and we can do a better assessment of what the best approach. We're happy to consult on this. But in short, the Chrome extension could be a good tool for this. And one of the good things about the Chrome extension is that if your session does expire, which it can do, depending on, like I said, when the cookie expires, you can easily update it from Screenly. So you essentially, you could just re-log in again and just basically press that button again, and it will submit that again to the asset. So you can easily kind of keep it updated. So that's option one. And option two would be then to ideally use a bearer token or some kind of like more sophisticated login algorithm. But again, this very much comes down to if it's supported by the tool or not. And the third option would be like a JavaScript injection where you can automate the login. And that's something we're happy to help with as well. We have resources and we have engineers that can help and solution architects can help build that custom for you. And then the long-term solution will be to build that into the edge app environment. But again, that varies a lot if it's an internal dashboard, if it's more like public accessible dashboard. Mm-hmm. But those are the three, I would say, three categories of solutions.
Yeah. And so in this world of edge apps, a couple of times on this call, we've mentioned open source. So we've had the Ubuntu Summit, and we had a talk from our engineer Nico, who works exclusively on Anthias.
And Chrome extension, actually, because Nico worked on that.
Oh, yeah? Okay, well, yeah. Very good. So, and Chrome extension. But so we have this open source product. You know, we talk about edge apps being open source, but then Screenly is not. What's the deal? How can people understand this relationship? What's our company philosophy on open source? What should people know?
It's a very complicated question. We're very much for open source, but we also need to keep the lights on. And the reality is that open source licensing is very difficult, and it's not something that we don't have a solution for yet. We try to open source as much as possible while keeping kind of our secret sauce closed source for now. But I would say that's creeping in. Like, we're open sourcing more and more, and in particular around the playground, Chrome extension is a good example of that. We are probably going to open source more of the libraries that we have built internally, and we have our CLI, which is open source. Everything that runs on a customer's computer, with the exception of the actual Screenly player, we try to keep open source, right? Exception of the backend, but we try to keep things as open as possible. And for things we can't open source or we won't open source, we try to provide SBOMs instead, which basically gives you a better insight into what actually goes into there and give you some reassurance on the security posture of those components. But yeah, we are very much pro open source, but we also need to keep the lights on in terms of making sure that we have a good business model at large.
And Screenly has a fully open source digital signage product today that users can use and can use forever.
That's correct. Anthias is fully open source. It's the most popular platform digital signage product on GitHub. So it's fully open source, completely detached to anything of our closed source. So it runs by itself. So no need for Screenly to seek to do Screenly backend. And actually, on the note of Anthias, we also added x86 support, or more commonly known as PC support, for Anthias as well lately, which I forgot to mention. So we have a lot of, we do commit very much to open source, and we very much try to be responsible open source contributors and help upstream and all that. But it's a complicated solution, a complicated question.
Sure. Yeah, and we actually have a lot of customers, actually quite large deployments, who start off as open source users on Anthias and then make the transition.
Yes, that's correct.
Typically around Screenly's more enterprise-oriented feature.
Yeah, Anthias is great for like your small deployments, maybe like a screen or two. But then as you start to deploy this in an enterprise environment, your internal compliance team will start saying, hey, we need to have an SLA, we need to have compliance with X, Y, and Z. And that's when they usually, some of them move to using our paid service. So there is, in some cases, they don't, right? And that's perfectly fine. We're happy to support people. We have full-time engineers working just on Anthias. So we're trying to be responsible open source contributors as well.
Mm-hmm. And for potential enterprise users listening to this, what are some of those key features that Screenly has that makes digital signage at scale a lot more palatable for users?
A lot of it has to do with access control and permission. It has to do with things like SAML, and various sign-on pieces, user provisioning, granularity of access control. Those things are not quite building blocks in Anthias. There have been some work on that. We're definitely making more work on that on Anthias, but Anthias is like a standalone device. That's it. You manage them independently. But if you try to manage hundreds of thousands of screens, then obviously that's not quite viable.
Mm-hmm. I think support SLAs also are an important component too.
Yes,
depending on what mission critical level.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like usually, like if you're a large enterprise, at least from my experience, like if something goes wrong, they want to have somebody they can call up or contact and have it resolved, rather than like it's an open source project. We'll get around to fixing it when we get around to fixing it.
Yeah. Well, hey, I think we covered a lot today. Screenly's been up and around the world. Few events in Europe, an event coming up in North America, and glad we're back in action here with our Screenly Changelog. We really value the relationships we have with our customers and want to keep everyone apprised of what's going on.
And we have really big things brewing that we can't speak about yet, but we have some big things brewing that we're real excited about covering, hopefully next changelog or maybe the one after that. But yeah, hopefully this year we can do some more bigger announcements as well. So big things happening at Screenly. So, but yeah, catch us at DSC. We'll catch Daniel at DSC.
Yes, I will be in Vegas. Yeah, if you want to hear of any secret projects, I might spill the beans there and there only. So you know where to find us. Find us at Canonical's booth, and really looking forward to it. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. We'll see you next time.
See you next time. Cheers, Daniel. Bye.
Bye.